So now we're in Silicon Valley, and there's apparently a syndrome called Silicon Valley syndrome. What is it? And how does it happen? Why is it so prevalent in Silicon Valley?
So Silicon Valley syndrome is a term coined specifically to address what used to be called commuter's syndrome. And what this looks like and what it's called for is because of the numerous hours of sitting, topped with sitting at the wheel, driving like this, rounded shoulders, very rounded spine, shortening of the hip flexors, and also sitting at the computer. This is why it's been called Silicon Valley syndrome, because of all the tech jobs now out here and the several hours that are spent sitting at a desk, hunched over.
Can we take a look at the next graphic, which I think shows this?
So here are examples of sitting posture. Let's not look at the perfect posture yet. Let's look at two normal ones. Typically, you're going to see this last one here. A lot of us find it easy to just sag down into our chair and type away, or have to reach forward and type away. Or we compensate. We either use a lumbar pillow or change our seat a little bit to something more ergonomically correct. However, the tendency with that is then we overarch our back, pulling into that extension, pressing each of our bones against each other in the back. What we'd like to see is lining up your ears over the shoulders, over the hips, with your arms right here if you're using a keyboard supported. That's ideal sitting posture, which we'll get into when we discuss upper cross syndrome in a little bit.
Okay, so let's actually talk about balance. Just like a car needs to stay in balance, or the tires will wear unevenly, we have to keep our bodies in balance so that we can keep them going for the long run, decade after decade. I sometimes hear about, these people who maintain their cars 100,000 miles, 200,000 miles, 300,000 miles, and I think, wow, they must know a lot more about their cars to make sure that they can keep running them for so long. So, Sheena, you are one of those who knows a lot more about the body. How can we maintain our bodies to keep them lifelong fit? Tell us about that.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to the next graphic. Here where we have our examples of some postures that are related to what's called lower cross syndrome. Lower cross syndrome is part of the lower body, and it's a discussion about different muscles being tight and weakened. So you probably hear about having to exercise this muscle or strengthen this muscle. Well, here's why. These different postures here are really great for showing all the different typical postures that we see that aren't balanced. This last graphic here shows a nice example of keeping those hips centered over the knees, and what we don't see is that those are exactly centered over the ankles. But what we have here is called an anterior pelvic tilt. This happens when our hip flexors, these muscles right through here, get really tight from us sitting down for several hours a day. Those create this position. And this right here is enough to cause back pain, hip pain, and knee pain. Because what happens when our muscles here get really tight, they shut off the ones that are in the back. When these muscles don't work back here, this stops working, this can't work properly, and the entire chain gets messed up. So it's important to make sure that we rebalance these postures. Another one is the tucked under. Again, we're tight here, tight in here, and all we're asking for is to have different pain in maybe our shoulder, our hips, our knees. Any of these postures that are away from neutral are going to cause pain because of the destructive forces that are being placed just with gravity pulling on your body, pushing on those joints.
So our bodies is such a sensitive instrument, and we don't get born with training manuals. We don't get told, here's how you look after this precious asset, the thing that's most important to us. I remember when I was in my early 20s, I had a knee injury, and I only really realized it when a car came along and I had to kind of run a little bit, and I had to limp. And then I thought, wow, what's happening with my body? What's going wrong? That was the only time I actually realized we take our bodies so much for granted. It's so important, this stuff that you're showing us. You're really telling us how to maintain our bodies for life. So maybe we should look at the next graphic so you can tell us a little bit more. Okay.
So here are those hip flexors that I was just talking about. These muscles lie right in here. These guys are a little bit of the enemy. You don't want to not pay attention to them. They need a lot of attention because we abuse them. We sit down with our hips at 90 degrees all day long, every day. Now, this big one that's in the middle here that attaches to your spine, that one actually cuts through the center of your body through here. It attaches down to your thigh bone, to your hip bone in the front here, and pulls on the inside of your spine. When those muscles are short, typically when we sit like this, that shortens these muscles. When we sit like this, that shortens these muscles. And then when we try to stand up, those muscles are so short that our backs want to arch, but we want to be more upright. But then we have abs that help us try to counter that, and our hamstrings try to pull these muscles down here. Everything gets imbalanced, and it's just this huge tug of war pulling on this entire area. Any tug of war going on in this area is going to create a tug of war up here. It's going to create a tug of war down below. So let's show the next graphic, which actually shows what these muscles look like when they're flexed. Now, this is when you're sitting at 90 degrees. Notice how that change in the length it's significant. So if these muscles are shortened and they stay shortened, it's really tricky as we get older to loosen them up. And again, tight hip flexors shut off these muscles back here. These muscles are your glutes. These glute muscles are the most powerful muscle in the entire human body. The potential for these muscles, not only with muscle density and metabolism, but your entire body's joints health. Without strong glutes, we can't have a strong spine. We can't have strong, healthy knees. Let's go ahead and look at the next graphic. So here's what happens when we don't have strong glutes. This muscle right here, where my hand is, that's called the piriformis muscle. If you've ever experienced any kind of sciatic pain, that shooting nerve pain that goes all the way down to your legs and your feet, you've probably heard this muscle before. This little tiny muscle, when your glutes don't work, again, the biggest muscle in the body, this little tiny guy has to take over for all of the muscle activities and positions, actions that this muscle does. So it takes care of rotating your hips outwards. It takes care of bringing your leg back and bringing your leg out to the side. This little guy does that all. When he has to do it all, that sciatic, this huge nerve here, in some people it actually lies in the middle of that piriformis muscle. In some people it rides behind. But the bigger this little muscle gets, the more it touches that sciatic nerve, creating a lot of nerve sensations all the way down. It can stop at the knee. It can start at your toes and work its way up. Nerves are a little tricky like that. This is why we need strong glutes.
Can we take a look at the next graphic, because this shows the actual postures.
So here's how to get your glutes to wake up. Use any kind of a dowel at home, maybe a broom. Just stick that to your back, and remember those 3 points, the back of your head, in between the shoulder blades, and the flat part of your tailbone. And just practice bending over. See how far you can go without your head moving too far down, or rounding that spine and pushing this dowel away from you. Or you could arch your back and create too much space in here when we still want just a little bit of space, no flaring here. So you can just practice just by bending over and coming right back up. This method is called the hip hinge mechanism. The hip hinge mechanism is how we use our glutes and save our lower backs. In people that have back pain, it shows that their glutes don't fire anymore, and so they end up using this as their way of lifting, and that ends up creating more pain, and the cycle continues.
Let's take a look at the next graphic.
So this next graphic shows a way of squatting, another important way of waking up these glute muscles, and a way of preventing pain. In this first picture right here, what we see is the girl is squatting much more upright. This is typically how a lot of us like to squat. The problem with this, though, is that it requires a lot of work from the front muscles of the thigh, and not so much equal distribution between the backside, and the front side. Now, when those knees get past the toes in the front here, it really causes a lot of damage and a lot of force on the kneecap itself and the knee joint. When that happens, a lot of people will stop squatting. As we get older, we lose our ability to get up and down off the ground, negotiate stairs, and this is why. Because we're squatting with our knees going past our toes.
So what's the right way to do it?
The right way to do it is displayed right here. Now, It looks a little too far forward for a lot of people, and it's going to look like your butt's getting way far back, but that's how we wake up the glutes. You're going to get your butt way in back of you, keeping your knee over your ankle with a straight vertical shin, and then you allow your behind to go way in back of you so that your shoulders can actually try to line up over the knees, which then will line up over the ankles.